Today we're talking about why you keep getting stuck in the middle of your novel. The most successful authors you love have figured out how to avoid hitting a wall halfway through writing their draft so it doesn't keep them from finishing. You probably started with a lot of momentum, so how do you keep that going through the end of your story, especially when you're already feeling stuck? This is one of the most frustrating parts of writing a novel. But the great news is there are things you can do to get that momentum back. I've worked with a lot of writers on this, getting them from being stuck at chapter 14, chapter 15, 16, to mapping out a complete connected story. And we did that by walking through 3 potential sticking points that were holding them back and how to move past them. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. By the way, I'm Megan. I'm a published writer, editor, and writing coach, and I teach writers to develop, outline, and finish stronger first drafts. So the first potential sticking point that is keeping you stuck at the middle of your novel is that your beats are out of order. I see this a lot on coaching calls with writers where we're trying to hash out what's actually keeping them stuck. And often it's because they have some beats laid out, but they're in the wrong place. Maybe they're ending the story on what should be the midpoint. Or maybe they've buried the catalyst or inciting incident of their story way too late. I mean, imagine if in Hamlet, his father's ghost appeared to him at the midpoint instead of at the end of Act 1. Imagine in Throne of Glass if Selena wasn't taken away in Chapter 1, but in Chapter 10. Imagine if in Holes, the story ended with Stanley running into the desert. The order of your beats really matters, and here's how you can tell if yours need a little bit of reshuffling. First, you're gonna find your true ending. What does that mean? All right, so sometimes we outline our stories even with a basic outline, we jot down some ideas, and we think we know where our story is ending. But I want you to be sure you know that your story is ending in the place it should. So ask yourself, where do I want my main character to end up internally? Where are they at internally by the end of the story? I was on a coaching call with a writer recently, and he realized he was envisioning his character ending up in a low place, having just lost his grip on reality. But after talking through the outline he'd created on our coaching call, we realized that where he had the plot ending didn't actually reflect that. The final plot point he had in his outline was actually a much more hopeful place for his main character. The main character wasn't in a place where he had lost his grip on reality. He had already experienced that and moved through it. So we had to reshuffle his beats to make sure that the plot aligned with the true ending of his story, which is where his main character ends up internally. And that ultimately connects to the deeper message you want to send with your story. In that writer's case, it was that obsessing over a dream will make you lose out on what's real. So find your story's true ending. Figure out where you really want your character to end up internally by the end of your story. And then you can start working backwards. And also, I'm assuming here that you have an idea of your story as a whole, even if it's not super specific yet. If you don't, it might be more helpful to find your story's true ending and then start from the beginning. But either way, these tips are gonna get you there. So if we're working backwards, we wanna start by asking, what is the tipping point that finally gets my character to that final ending internal state that I want them to have? So if my character is ending up in a really low, depressed place, what is that final tipping point that gets them there? That is going to be the climax of your story. It's the final straw that gets your character to the place you have laid out for them. You don't even have to figure out super specific plot details here. You just want to think about what kind of event would shift that for them. Then from there, you want to ask yourself, what moment precedes this event that shifts my story in a big way? This is going to be your midpoint. It needs to be a big, significant point of no return for your character. It should shift your story in a really meaningful way. All the stakes need to combine here to make us go, okay, what now? How is this character going to get through this? Think of Stanley running into the desert in Holes. Will he get caught and then end up punished even worse than he already has been? Will he find Zero? Will he die? Those are all really high stakes, the highest they've been in the book so far. So once you find your story's true ending, you want to pinpoint the event that pushes your character over the edge and gets them to that place. That is the climax of your story. Then you want to think about, okay, what is a moment preceding that pivots my story, shifts it in a really significant way? From there, you can ask yourself, what moment puts my main character on a new path toward the ending? This is the catalyst or the inciting incident. This is a shift in your character's life where life will no longer continue the way it has. Think of Selena being taken out of the salt mines in Throne of Glass. It sets her life on a completely new path. And again, you're pinpointing this big milestone in your story based on the true ending you figured out. You're leading your character to that true ending. So what's the best initial turning point that sets them on that path? And again, if you already have more of your story figured out, it might be easier to go in order of like catalyst, midpoint, climax instead of working backwards. Whatever works for you. But what you want to do, no matter what order you go in, is think about your true ending at each point, at each of these milestones, because each of these milestones is getting them a little bit closer to that true ending. And if you're like, catalyst, midpoint, climax, what does all that mean? I have a video for you on that. I'll link it above. But what you really want to make sure is that your beats are in the right order. So is your catalyst the event that is putting your main character on the path toward that true ending? Is your midpoint something that really shifts the story? Maybe it's a revelation the character has. Maybe it's a plot twist. Maybe it's a big reveal of a secret that your reader has been wrestling with. Whatever it is that currently placed at the midpoint of your story? And then for the climax, is it pushing your character over the edge to the point where they arrive at your true ending? So that's how you can start determining whether your beats are out of order. And putting your beats in the right order is a great starting point, but if you're hitting this next sticking point, it really doesn't matter. So the second sticking point is you're not compounding your consequences. A hot take that I have is you shouldn't be getting stuck in the middle ever. Once you hit the middle, you should have enough set up that your story can ride the consequences of everything that's already happened through to the end. I remember one of the writers I was working with in my Novel Wayfinder program came to me and was like, I figured out the first half of my story. I cannot get past this certain point. But once we got the major milestone beats of his story in order and started diving deeper into what was actually going on between those beats, he realized, oh, I actually have set up enough in my story to the midpoint that really what I need to show from the midpoint to the ending is just the consequences and fallout of everything I set up before. He didn't need to add anything new or crazy to his story because he had enough to work with already. It was like the biggest light bulb went off over his head. It was so cool to see. So all throughout your story, especially in the beginning, you want to set up conflict after conflict where the consequences compound. So it's not about having your character face an obstacle and then they get through it and then they face another obstacle and then they get through it. That's going to start feeling really staccato and kind of boring. What really strong novels do is they have a conflict, it has consequences. Those consequences lead to another conflict. The consequences of that conflict add to the consequences felt by the first one, and it compounds like that. That's how you build tension, not just in a scene or a chapter, but across an entire story. For example, let's look at Where the Crawdads Sing. So we have an initial conflict with Kaya's mom leaving, and one by one her other family members leave until it's just her and her father, but that leads her to meeting Jumpin', and Jumpin' is somebody who she relies on once her father leaves. We see a conflict where she's humiliated at school, and that causes her to drop out, which causes her to spend all of her time in the marsh, and it also leads to her being called the Marsh Girl, and having this reputation as being wild and potentially capable of murder. And then she connects with Tate, but he leaves too, and that opens her up to going out with Chase. And that leads to a whole other load of plot events and conflicts and consequences. But everything that's set up in the first half of the novel influences and directly impacts the second half. That's what you want to go for. And maybe this will be a more concrete example, but let's say you're going for a run, and the first conflict or obstacle you face is that you feel a really small pebble in your shoe. You're like, okay, well that's kind of annoying, but you can still run. And then the next conflict or obstacle you face is that you trip and you twinge your ankle. So it's like, okay, well now you're dealing with the pebble in your shoe and your ankle really hurts, but you're still trying to run. And then the next conflict or obstacle is that a dog from your neighbor's yard starts chasing you and barking. So now you're trying to run even faster. You've got this threat behind you looming, like this dog is gonna get you. And you have a pebble in your shoe and your ankle hurts. So you see how the consequences of previous conflicts stack on one another until we end up thinking, how are you gonna get away from this dog when you have a sprained ankle and a pebble in your shoe? It's not just, oh, well, you solved the pebble problem and you fixed your ankle, so now the dog chasing you, well, all you have to do is run fast. trust. So that's how you can compound the consequences of these challenges your characters are going through. If you're hitting a wall in the middle of your novel, go back to your opening and ask yourself, have I set up enough conflict? Are my conflicts easily overcome? Are there any consequences that are compounding? Do I need to put a pebble in my character's shoe? And here are a few questions you can ask yourself to figure out if your setup is actually the problem. Are there multiple conflicts leading up to my midpoint? Am I showing how those conflicts compound within my main character's life? Or are they facing a conflict, resolving it easily, facing another conflict, resolving that one easily? Are the conflicts that my main character faces at the start of the story making it harder for them to live their daily life? Am I saving my most intense conflict for last, or have I given my main character a big, sweeping conflict right at the start that makes everything else pale in comparison? Do I know where my character ends up? It's very difficult to create a clear setup for a question mark ending. It's kind of like packing for a trip, but you don't know where you're going. Like, is it Alaska or is it New Zealand? Is it France or is it Mexico? Like, all of those destinations will require different packing. Same goes with your story. Once you've thought through those questions, it's a good idea to just jot down the conflicts in your story in order, really basic bullet points, and then make sure they're in an order where the intensity is building throughout your story. So for instance, in my story about running down the street, I wouldn't have the dog chasing me first and then the pebble in my shoe and then I twist my ankle, because the intensity of those things is different. Like the pebble in the shoe, okay, I can kind of ignore that. The twisted, tweaked ankle, oh, that hurts a little bit more, but I can keep running. The dog, oh crap, now I really have to book it down the street. You know what I'm saying? So make sure your conflicts are in order by just listing them all out. And it's not always about the external intensity, like yeah, getting chased by a dog is literally scarier than getting a pebble in your shoe, but it could also be about the emotional intensity or significance. One character might feel really discouraged by tweaking their ankle, and another character might use that as more motivation to run faster. So most importantly, think about what those conflicts mean to your main character. All right, so you've found your story's true ending and you've reordered your beats, and you've made sure that you're compounding consequences to all the conflicts that are happening in your story. Doing that will help you with the story aspect of getting stuck halfway through your novel. But without addressing this final sticking point, you might still find yourself struggling to make it to the end of your story. So this final sticking point that will keep you stuck in the middle of your novel is you've lost the deeper point of your story. Just like readers connect most with the heart of your story, what's underneath all of the plot, so do you as a writer. I've been revising my third novel for a couple of months now, and it's been way harder for me than writing. I think part of that is because I've been with this story for so long. If you write or read anything 100 times, it's gonna get real old. So I try to go back to my character premise, the heart of my story, the message I care deeply about conveying through it, and that reminds me of why I even set out to write the story in the first place. Reconnecting with the deeper point or message of your story, or why you got excited about it in the first place, can be a huge motivator when you're starting to feel the drag of the middle. It can keep you more encouraged, motivated, and energized. Because finishing a novel takes a long, long time. Even our favorite authors, even authors who are very prolific, they're not cranking out a book in 3 months. So if you want to get past this slump in the middle and see your book through to the end, don't lose sight of why you started writing it in the first place. It also allows you to better frame the events in your story because you'll have a renewed sense of where you want your story to go. Kind of like what I said in sticking point number 1, where you want to find your story's true ending. So here are some things you can do to rekindle the flame between you and your novel. First, think about the deeper message of your story. This is part of finding your story's true ending. But what do you long for readers to feel or reflect on after they read your book? Close your eyes and imagine opening a box full of copies of your book in print. Imagine the sound of the cover opening for the very first time, flipping through the pages and getting that freshly printed book smell. Or try to remember the moment you got the idea for your story. What made you say, I'm going to spend a considerable amount of my time writing this story. I want to make it happen. What made you say that? So you're going to get the major milestone beats of your story in order. You're going to make sure all of the challenges and conflicts in your story have consequences that compound. And you're going to reconnect with the deeper point, the reason why you're writing the story, what you want readers to take away from it. And if you can do that, you'll stop getting stuck in the middle and you'll end up up with a much clearer vision of what needs to happen from the midpoint to the ending of your story. If you want to take everything we've talked about today and use it to start a new outline for your story, let me teach you the easiest way to outline any story. Otherwise, I think this video would be very helpful for you as well, and I will see you next time. Happy writing.